We are nearly 2 months into Regulation F 2.0, and as the metagame continues to develop, we are seeing new sets and spreads rise to the top. So today, I want to talk about 20 of the best Pokemon seeing play right now. I want to discuss why these Pokemon are good, the sets and common partners, as well as some of the common benchmarks we see for their EVs. If you guys want to see more videos like this, make sure to like the video, hype the video, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's jump into it. So to kick things off here, of course, we have none other than the queen of Regulation F, the best fairy in the format, Flutter Mane. Now, Flutter Mane is a Pokemon that has taken a bit of an interesting turn covering Regulation F 2.0, and that's because we are seeing sets very similar to the ones you see here on the screen, which are these, near max HP, near max defense, bold with minimal speed sets. Now, there was a Japanese player that used this exact set spread in, I think if it was the Victory Road Tour, if it was the first, second, or third of last year, but basically a Japanese player won the event using a spread like this. And then it turned out a lot of people were running a very similar spread. Thanks to that Victory Road leak, we got to see a lot of people were running these kind of spreads. Now, the reason this max HP, max defense, bold nature Flutter Mane is very good is because a lot of the common stuff in the meta that you can live, right? So for example, Rillaboom, which is a Pokemon we will talk about later, they typically run something like 116 attack with an adamant nature. This allows you to live Wood Hammer in grassy terrain because of it. This allows you to live things like a Mystic Water Urshifu almost always. I think the only way a Mystic Water Urshi with an adamant nature ever KOs this thing is if they triple max roll, which is incredibly unlikely because you would have to hit that 1 in 16 3 separate times. It also allows you to live things like Terrafire, Ivy Cudgel with Intimidate, which is very good. And overall, there is just a lot of Pokemon currently in the metagame that can't one-shot this thing that typically would, prior to when they were running those a lot more offensive variants. Now, I will say there are sets that you can play around with this. I know I've seen some people go as low as 212, and then you can go up to 52 speed. The thing with this is, I kind of think you're just playing the Flutter Mane Speed Wars at this point. Again, this is the set that won the VR Tour. Essentially, the reason you want more HP is just opposing Flutter Manes. It is quite uncommon right now to see Flutter Manes that are running things like Shadow Ball. But if you ever were to get like a Speed Booster Flutter Mane with a Shadow Ball, obviously the more HP, the better. Just because this Pokemon has such high special defense as it is. But yeah, look, this set here is pretty common, right? You're seeing it paired up a lot on these, Raging Bolt balance teams where you got the Fire, Water, Grass core of like things like Incineroar, Rilla, Urshi. Then you'll have like your Raging Bolt, and then you'll have something like a Landorus as well, just to patch things up. So this Pokemon's job right now is one, it's the best fairy type attacker in the game, right? Very good into things like Raging Bolt and Urshifu. With Speed Booster and Icy Wind, it is also one of the best speed control Pokemon in the game that isn't like a Prankster Tailwind mon. And then on top of that as well, you just have Thunder Wave, which one, again, is very good speed control. It is essentially permanent speed control, which is one thing I think a lot of people forget about when they talk about it versus Icy Wind. You can Thunder Wave something like an Urshifu, it can switch out, and then when it comes back in, it still has that half speed, which I do think is one of the more important distinctions when it does come to Thunder Wave. I think a lot of people forget that about it. It is permanent speed control, right? You can't just Icy Wind it and then it switches out, right? That Thunder Wave is there to stay for the rest of the game. And also, too, it just puts variance in your favor, right? If you paralyze the enemy's whole team, at some point, they're all going to just, start full powering. And it's super frustrating to play with. Now, the last move on this set, again, it can vary. Not every Flutter Mane is running Thunder Wave. We did see at EUIC that, not EUIC, sorry, at Birmingham, that a lot of people did actually drop Thunder Wave, especially like, in the European region for whatever. We see options like Taunt here, which is very good at breaking balance, against things like Carmine Raging Bolt. You can taunt it before they can set up. It's very good into things like Amoonguss. Even some of the Trick Room setters, right? Typically things like Porygon 2, will lead with something like Incineroar to guarantee the Trick Room. Being a Ghost type with Taunt, obviously you can Taunt it and you kind of force their hand, right? All of a sudden they can't really lead Incin, now they have to look for their Amoonguss line, and there's different stuff, right? That, the Taunt just, it puts pressure on, right? You can kind of force out that Incineroar, force in that, Amoonguss and play the game a bit different. We've also seen things like Pain Split, which is very good. If your Flutter Mane is low HP up against things like Raging Bolt, having Pain Split there to heal up and not take a Thunderclap is very good. Now, some of the other common sets we are seeing are the Choice Specs variants. Now, when it comes to the Choice Specs Flutter Mane, there are a few different ways you can go about it. This set here is a much more defensive set. This is very good into things like the Choice Scarf Urshifus, for example. Gives you a good chance to live those Surging Strikes. The speed set in particular, this just allows you to outspeed things like the, for example, Max Speed Ring Moon, also things like Adamant Focus Size Chien-Pao, special attack boosting Flutter Manes as well, this also gets. So that's kind of why we have this speed stat here. Now, again, when it comes to these spreads, you can kind of play around with them. You can go as low as 143. This gives you a pretty good chance of living things like Surging Strike. It's not amazing, though, which is the only reason I personally do like going a little bulkier, just because, like, Flutter Mane is a Pokemon that, as long as, like, you've got that Terra Fairy and that Choice Specs there, you will do a lot of damage. So you don't necessarily have to invest. There are people out there who will swear by it. They'll go on Modest Nature. They'll go, like, Max Special Attack and do a lot of damage, but personally, I do like when my Flutter Mane can survive a bunch of hits. I guess the other thing as well worth mentioning is you can actually go up to 160 HP. This is like a little small efficiency thing when you're pairing it up with Pokemon like Rillaboom. Because basically, with the way that the grassy terrain works, if you're hit, for example, 159, you get 1 less HP than you would if you hit 160. This is only important, really, if you take, obviously, multiple turns of grassy terrain, but it is definitely something to keep in mind just because it is 1/16th. So, at this stage, you will get 10 HP, where at this stage, you will get 9. So, just a small efficiency thing there. But yeah, when it comes to the Flutter Mane, it's really personal choice. As I said, I like going a bit faster with mine, but it's very team dependent. You'll see people pair up a Choice Specs Flutter Mane with things like Farigiraf. On those teams, they will go a bit slower, and I'll kind of show it off here with the next spread, which is just the Fairy Feather set. But on these sets, they'll go a bit slower because the goal is obviously to lead it with a Trick Room team where, you'll have this like Sun Room team where you've got, Incin, Torkoal, Farigiraf, Ursaluna, and you're kind of essentially just baiting your opponent to lead their, their answers to something like Farigiraf, right? So they might lead their Incineroars, and then all of a sudden you hit them with a set like this where you are a very slow Flutter Mane, so in Trick Room, you do underspeed a lot of opposing Flutter Manes, but also, you're able to invest a lot into bulk, you're able to go the Modest Nature, and with things like Sun Boosted especially, right, getting that that special attack boost, again, we have Fairy Feather here on this set, but, it's also commonly seen as well with, potentially the Fairy Feather as well, which we have seen, and it just really enables this Pokemon to pump out a lot of damage, and again, the scary thing with Flutter Mane is it's like, if it's able to attack first, especially with a set like this, very, very hard to be removed on turn 1, and you can just pump out damage with things like Terra Fairy, Fairy Feather, and then the addition of things like Sun. Flutter Mane is just, it's incredible, right? And again, you see the versatility in these different sets here, right? You got the Specs, the Booster, the Fairy Feather. There's a big reason why this Pokemon is the best Pokemon in the format, or at least one of the best, right? It's at the top of the usage charts. It's so versatile. It can do so many different things depending on what your team needs. So moving on here to the king of the format, we have Incineroar. Now, I did realize I have not actually changed the Terra and the ability there, but this is one of the many Incineroar sets we have seen. Now, Safety Goggles has actually been falling off quite a bit as of late, just because Amoonguss had not been super popular. But in saying that now, so far in the the last couple of weeks with the regionals we've seen Amoonguss basically the Amoonguss resurgence, right? Amoonguss is rising up the charts. It is doing very, very well. It is proving to be an absolute pain in the ass again, especially as teams were starting to not tech for it. Amoonguss kind of rise back up, and it became incredibly, incredibly good now. And that's why I do have things like the Safety Goggles here. The Terra Ghost on Incin is pretty simple. It just gives you a, fighting immunity and a fake out immunity, right? Potentially you'd lead into a slower Incineroar. You want to make sure you get a fake out onto their ally. You go for things like Terra Ghost. Again, into things like Urshifu, right? It's a decent defensive Terra. It allows you to deliver Surging Strikes. It allows you to deliver close combat. Just very, very good in general. Now, the thing with Incin is this Pokemon is very, very interesting, right? Incin can go a lot of different ways with its EVs. We have seen people run a very, very fast Incineroar to go for things like knockoff onto Assault Vest Raging Bolts, which I do think is, definitely an option. It's also pretty good as well as Life Orb Raging Bolt has continued to rise up. But typically speaking, when it comes to the, investment here on Incineroar, there is one set in particular where I think you specifically want to calc, and we'll go through that when we get to the next couple of sets here. But I do think for something like this, a pretty simple, just hit the bump here, go for a Careful Nature. This is just always a really, really reliable set, right? If you want a little bit of speed for the, the no speed Incin, you can always go for something like this. If you're running it with Trick Room, you can always, drop this down, and then potentially just like lower that speed by 1. Just that way in Trick Room, you're always slower. Or if you want to guarantee you have the slower Parting Shot, for example, it's also really, really good. But typically, yeah, on the Safety Goggles set, you are more of a support where you kind of just want to go in and out with Parting Shots, Fake Outs, Intimidates, knock off here and there. And typically, yeah, you want to play it really, really defensive. Now, for the other sets here, this is the Assault Vest variant. Again, typically the AV set is where we see the Incineroars go a lot more offensive. We've seen people go 116 Adamant. We've even seen people recently go as high as 196 Adamant. This basically just allows Incin to do crazy damage. And it's very, very good as well into a lot of the Pokemon out there, like the Gholdengos, that are speccing to make sure they just live like a, a Adamant 36 Flare Blitz. Now, when you go this much investment, it makes it much, much harder. On the Assault Vest variants as well, Terra Grass is typically the go-to just so you have a ways of playing around Amoonguss. The major change in the set as well is the U-turn here, but again, we've even seen people run pretty fast Incins, right? You go for stuff like this. And again, the Jolly 123 isn't something we have seen too much of lately. But something like that 114 to 115 speed stat is pretty good to catch some of those faster Raging Bolts. Because we have seen Raging Bolts recently go for a little bit of speed that way. After like an Icy Wind, they can outspeed things like Timid Landorus. which off the top of my head, off memory, I think it's like 113 it's got to hit. I probably should have double checked that, but yeah, typically they aim for that like 113 area if they are going to get really speedy, and because that allows you just, you know, make sure you get that speed advantage there. And the other set as well in terms of EVs is one I will touch on in the next set, and that is the Surging Strikes calc. Now, on these Rocky Helmet sets, we have seen people going for Terra Flying. This just gives you a really good matchup into both Urshifu and into Landorus in particular. With Terra Flying, you can't be Earth Powered, you resist the close combat. And with Rocky Helmet, even if you are, you know, a Fire type still, this set here will allow you to live a Surging Strikes most of the time. Obviously, you know, barring any, you know, boosting moves, things like, you know, Rain and Sword of Ruin and whatnot. I believe Terra as well also pushes it over if they're like Mystic Water. But yeah, this is typically your standard, like, live the you know, the Surging Strikes calc, right? And then again, from here, it's kind of whatever. If you want a little bit of speed, you can go for that. You know, if you're playing it in Tail Room, hitting 85 is always pretty solid just to outspeed things like Timid Landorus and Tailwind. But typically as well, I just think, you know, pumping it into Spadeffi, you know, probably dropping it down and just like splitting those extra EVs is never a bad thing. And of course, you always want to Intimidate. I can't believe I forgot that. The next Mon on our list here is none other than Urshifu, right? Arguably the most broken Pokemon in the game, right there with the other two in terms of usage. Now, Urshi with Focus Sash is pretty simple, right? You're just running your 3 common stabs plus Protect. Your Terra, it really depends. Terra Grass is pretty good if you're worried about Amoonguss, right? You can get around its redirection, can't be spored, all that kind of stuff. If you are worried about damage, of course, Terra Water is the way to go. As for the Mystic Water set, we are seeing 2 different Terras in particular right now, and that's Steel and Fire. Steel obviously is really good into a lot of the Fairy attacks, but Fire in particular just gives you a really good matchup into both Flutter Mane and Ogerpon Fire, right? So that's the main reason to run Terra Fire, which I honestly, in my opinion, probably is the optimal one right now. I will say, typically speaking, though, Fire and Steel are bad because of Landorus, because typically Landoruses can just threaten one-shots into you as it is. But yeah, obviously there are ways to play around it, right? You got Protect, you got Aqua Jet, so make sure you avoid the Landos. Now, in terms of the EVs here, this is my personal favorite spread, and I do have it on the next 2 sets. Basically, with 60 HP and 4 defense, you're always able to live a Choice Bender Terra Normal Extreme Speed with Chien-Pao on the board. And this 60 108 Spadef allows you to live things like Thunderclap from the typical Raging Bolts, which are like 108 modest, right? Now, in saying that, I do think things are going to change because we, again, with the Birmingham Regionals last weekend, we did see a rise in both Life Orb and Booster Energy Raging Bolt, which, again, is pretty scary because all of a sudden, these Urshifus that have been teching to live the Thunderclaps are no longer going to be able to live the Thunderclaps, which is very, very scary. Of course, if they did get up a Calm Mind as well, that was obviously not, you know, something you could work around. And then we have the speed stat. Now, this stat is pretty simple. This is just the Smeagol stat. As someone who's played a bunch of Smeagol so far in this format, I can tell you there is nothing better than just clicking a raw Spore into an Urshifu and they're just slower than 140. That's why when I play mine, I just make sure I'm faster because the last thing I want to do is just get spored by a jolly Smeagol. So that is why we have this set here. And again, same thing goes for this set. You know, this is my Choice Scarf variant. This is just what allows you to live the Thunderclaps, the E-Speeds, you know, just making sure that the Urshi has just enough HP to live, you know, some of the standard attacks and make sure it can fire off an attack, which I do think is pretty important. And on the Choice Scarf sets as well, you do want Terra Water just because you do lack the damage from, obviously with the Sash, you've got the Terra Water because you've got the, you know, the built-in bulk. But with the Mystic Water, you know, you've got the extra damage coming from the Mystic Water. That's what allows you to go for the defensive Terra. Whereas on the Choice Scarf, you have the speed, but you don't have the damage. And that is why typically you see Terra Water on those sets. So Raging Bolt here is another premier Pokemon in the format. Now, I personally do really like the Assault Vest variant just because it allows you to give a bit of support to the team with your 4th move. Now, typically the AVs will go for Terra Fairy. Terra Electric is also still pretty good because your only weakness is ground type. So as long as you're able to play around Landoruses and the Ursalunas, Terra Electric can actually be very, very devastating. But things like Terra Fairy are also very, very good, of course, for things like the Regidragos, which are still pretty popular right now. In terms of the moves, typically you'll always see Thunderbolt, Thunderclap, and a Dragon move, whether that be Draco Meteor or Dragon Pulse, both are pretty good. And then in the last slot, it really just comes down to what the team needs. Personally, I love Electro Web. I think it's just really good to have that secondary form of speed control. You know, if you are next to, say, something like an Ogerpon or an Urshifu, you can click Protect, click Electro Webs, and now you're faster, right? Which is obviously very, very good. But options like Snarl and stuff like that as well are very, very good for the Trick Room teams. Now, when it comes to... Actually, I probably should have spoken about the bulk as well before we move on. This is just the personal set I like to run because I do like to have a little bit of speed here. I do believe the only issue with this is I think it speed ties base Rillaboom, so maybe it's worth like looking at potentially either just putting more into offense or putting more into speed. This bulk here in particular is for Adamant Chien-Pao Icicle Crash. I think there's like one killing roll, so it's like you live it like 94% of the time or something like that, which is honestly pretty good. Then the offense here is just to hit that, that bump number and just go up one because even numbers are typically better, especially when you've got things like photosynthesis getting involved. Again, there are different ways you can run this. As I mentioned earlier, there are people who are running faster Raging Bolts. I think if you're going to run a faster Raging Bolt, you do probably want to take it out of the, defensive stats, because you want to up the speed, probably up the special attack. Like, if you're going to go a faster Raging Bolt, you want to make sure it hits a little bit harder. But this is typically the standard bulk you'll see. This will just allow you to live basically everything you need to, right? And then, yeah, so we also had, like, this set here. Now, this is, like, it could be Booster, it could be Leftovers. This is just typically the Carmine set. It could also be Life Orb. Again, on these Booster and Life Orb sets as well, you do see Carmine get dropped sometimes in getting replaced by, Thunderbolt, just so you have a consistent attack. And the same thing goes, right? On a set like this, you probably don't need as much speed, but sometimes, you see really fast Raging Bolts. I've even seen people run Timid Raging Bolt. I personally don't think Timid Raging Bolt is good. That's probably more of a best of one closed team sheet cheese where, you kind of surprise your opponent with like a Raging Bolt faster than their Gholdengo who's like slow and bulky. But yeah, typically speaking, this is the kind of set you will see. As I said, you can drop the bulk down, but this is just the standard bulk I personally like. Terra Electric is very, very good though, especially on Life Orb sets because, again, you got things like, for example, like Urshifu, who typically doesn't care about, about Thunderclap. All of a sudden, a Terra Electric, Booster or Life Orb Thunderclap can threaten one-shots on that Pokemon. So that is a very, very scary set. So Ogerpon Wellspring is a pretty good Pokemon in the metagame right now. Obviously, having Redirection for Raging Bolt is very good because you can kind of stop it from clicking Thunderclaps. Obviously, with Water Absorb, it is also very, very good into Urshifu. You can redirect Surging Strikes. With its Terra and getting, Embody Aspect, getting +1 special defense, it's also very good into the special attackers, mainly things like Flutter Mane. It is also a redirection mon. I just realized too, I don't actually have redirection here. It's meant to be Follow Me. It's not meant to be Spiky Shield. But yeah, with Follow Me, you're able to redirect things like Spore from Amoonguss. So yeah, as a supported piece right now, Ogerpon Wellspring is just incredible. Now, the set you see here in front of you, the 252-100 defense, this is your answer to things like, what do you call it? Terra Normal Choice Band of Dragonite. This will allow you to Follow Me a Dragonite, and as long as you don't get crit, you will always live even with Sword of Ruin. Now, on a set like this, an important thing to note is you do want to get 133 speed. The reason for that is because if they're adamant with max speed, on the D-Knights, for example, they'll hit 132, and Follow Me and Extreme Speed have the same priority. So if you were to go, like, say, like this, and they were adamant max speed, the Extreme Speed would go off before the Follow Me, and that is never a great thing. But typically, they're always going to be adamant because they just want as much damage as possible. Now, in terms of the sets, again, if you were going to run a set like this, I think like something like 76 and then just like this would be completely fine. If the Ogerpon's job on the team is specifically to be like redirection support, I think this is completely fine. The other thing though, and this is what a lot of teams these days are doing, is they're running it up to 154 speed. The reason for this is to catch things like the Landorus incarnates, right? So this would allow you to outspeed a modest Landorus, which hit a modest Landorus, which is 153. And then from there, you're still able to go like this. You still have pretty solid damage with Adamant. You get the Terra to buff it up. Ivy Cudgel is obviously a pretty broken move. Horn Leech is also really, really good for regeneration. So a standard set like this is just very good, right? It's a lot of bulk. You still got pretty good damage, and you outspeed things like Lando. Now, in saying that, we are also seeing people go a bit faster because you're seeing a lot of Tornaduses, for example, hitting around that 157 mark to outspeed things like Gouging Fire at -1, for example, like if they're booster speed. And because of that, we have seen some Ogerpons creep up to that 157, 158 range. I think if you've got like if you're really worried about Tornaduses, like maybe it's okay. But realistically speaking, I think 154 here is completely fine. Like a set like this will do exactly what you need. I also think as well, one thing that's a little underexplored, and we have seen it rising up a little bit, is Sword Stance Ogerpon. I think a set like this with SD is very, very good. You could also even honestly go for something like Jolly if you're going Sword Stance as well. The only issue I have with Jolly is you rely on that SD, where this set here still does quite a bit of damage, especially with Terra Water. And you don't necessarily rely on the SD to deal damage, but it's obviously a nice option to have there, especially if your opponent is trying to cycle things like Incineroar. So Tornadus here is pretty simple in my opinion. If you're running the Focus Sash set, this is essentially what you want to be looking at. Terra Ghost allows you to dodge the fake outs. Bleakwind and Tailwind are absolute musts. I personally like Icy Wind because typically when you are running a set like this with Focus Sash, you are just going to be timid max speed. This allows you to outspeed things like Jolly, Ogerpon, opposing Tornaduses and whatnot. And so, sometimes, say for example, you've got like a Gholdengo on the board, and you just have a funny feeling that their Ogerpon is going to be faster than you. You can go for an Icy Wind, and then you hit him with an Ivy Cudgel, and Bob's kind of your uncle there. This bulk here is pretty simple. This just gives you a really, really good chance to live a Surging Strikes from a Urshifu. I think it's something like they'll KO you like 10% of the time, something like that off the top of my head. You can get it a little bit better if you sacrifice a little bit of special attack, but typically on a Focus Sash set, I do want to deal as much damage as possible. And realistically, a lot of the Urshifus these days anyway aren't going max attack. So even, if this does calc for like a 252 Adamant Urshi, if they go for like Terra Water on any variant, they are just going to KO you just because the Pokemon's pretty busted. But this set will just give you a very, very good chance of always living something, living a Surging Strikes of a Urshifu. Now, in terms of this set here, this is like the Cover Cloak Terra Dark stuff. Cloak obviously allows you not to get faked out. Terra Dark just allows you to, avoid things like faster taunts from opposing Tornadus and Whimsicots, right? In terms of the moves, this is entirely up to you. Again, I think Bleak Wind, Tailwind are an absolute must on it. From there, it's whatever, right? This Pokemon gets all the weather moves. It also gets access to a fast taunt. So, if you really need something like Amoonguss, you've got options. This one has a lot going for it. Now, in terms of speed, this is kind of what I was touching on with the Ogerpon before. If you really want your Tornadus to go a bit faster, you can. This will allow it to outspeed things like, the standard Ogerpons that aren't like Jolly Max Speed, get off a Bleak Wind, pretty good into like Landorus, stuff like that. Especially if you're running like Icy Wind as well, it's always really nice to outspeed the Landoruses. Now, in saying that, if you do want to go something more specific, off memory, I think it's like 164 Calm, is it? Yeah, I think 164 Calm will allow you to live like the Assault Vest, the Raging Bolt, T-Bolt off memory. And then if you wanted to live a, was it like 180? I think it's 188 Bulb off memory. I think 188 Bulb would like allow you to live like a Terra Water, Choice Scarf, Urshifu, Surging Strikes, right? So it really depends on what you want to go for. Some Tornaduses as well will actually, if they're running a set like this with like weather, they will opt to, okay, I screwed that up there. They will opt to go slower just because they want to have the slower weather. Like say you're playing like Sunny Day Tornadus, you go up against a Rain Dance Tornadus. In an ideal world, you are slower and you get your weather control off first, right? Say you're playing like, for example, a Flutter Mane Tornadus lead and you lead into like a Tornadus Urshifu. If their Urshi's confident it can live a Moonblast, they'll just go for a Rain Dance. But if you're slower, you'll get the Sun off second. Therefore, they'll Surging in the Sun, it'll do nothing. And then, you fire off like a Choice Specs, Terra Fairy, Dazzling Gleam, or a Moonblast, whatever it might be. So because of that, sometimes it is better to go slow. And again, like if you wanted to go slow, you can even go this. I've even seen people run, minus speed on their Taunts going for stuff like this. Typically, I don't like to play those kind of mind games. I will always like run just a little bit of speed. Even if I'm going slow, I like to hit that 133. Again, this just gets things like the Choice Band of D-Knights. Like the last thing I want to do is lose a game because, he went for like an Outrage, I went for a Bleak Wind, and he was just 1 point faster than me. So, Landorus Incarnate right now is basically the premier ground type in the format. It has a very, very good spot. Of course, Raging Bolt is one of the best Pokemon in the game right now. And the Ogerpons are also pretty popular, which has a decent matchup into. Typically speaking, these three moves will almost always be on your Landorus set, right? You got Earth Power, Sludge Bomb, Protect. Sludge Bomb, again, allows you to hit the grass types. If you look at the top 12 mons in this format, 4 of them are grass types. Earth Power obviously hits, the Incin, it hits the Raging Bolt. Landorus just has a very, very positive matchup into all of the top threats. As for the second move here, so the last move, it really depends on the team. Sandsear Storm is very, very good, especially if you have Rain. It's also pretty good if you don't have like a fake out one. Like I think if you're running like Incin or Rillaboom, you probably want to swap this out for Substitute. This just gives you really good matchups into, for example, like Trick Room teams. If you're able to go like fake out sub turn 1, kind of force them to have to fire 2 attacks into your Landorus. You can bait out attacks, you can get off an attack and allows you to stall Trick Room. Pretty good into things like Amoonguss as well, right? If they lead Amoonguss, you just fake out their partner, set off a sub, and they can't spoil you. So for reasons like that, it's very, very good. Terra Poison is very, very good offensively right now. Terra Poison Sludge Bomb is very, very broken. But in terms of the Terras, I do think Steel might be a little better. The reason why I think Steel is a little bit better is just because Tornaduses and Flutter Manes right now are all running Icy Wind. And they're still going to do like 70% to you. Even though it's a very, very weak move, you are 4 times weak to it in your base form. But I think having Terra Steel to resist it is very good. And also things like Terra Fairy, Flutter Mane, obviously you can Terra to resist them. But if you're in your base form, they fire off something like Terra Fairy Moonblast, you will just get one shot. In terms of speed, right now, I personally like to go max speed, modest nature. And the reason for this is you just outspeed all of the base 100s, you outspeed things like the Urshis, because none of the Urshis really right now are going a Jolly Nature. Obviously, your major concern is the Ogerpons, but typically if they're like, the only redirection on a team, they will be slower than you. The Hearthflames and the Wellsprings typically can be slower. I would actually say a lot of the Hearthflames are slower, and we'll get to that in a second. So because of that, I do like going modest. In terms of the damage, I think you can just go something as simple as this, right? Where you are that 116, right? You hit that, that bump here, and then you can just pump the rest into HP. If you wanted, you can also split here as well, but I don't think it matters too much. This is more general bulk than anything. You're not trying to live any one attack in particular. You just want that little bit of extra survivability. So Ogerpon Hearthflame is actually one of the more interesting Pokemon in the format, in my opinion. Typically, Ogerpon is almost always paired up with a Rillaboom, and that's why you see Grassy Glide on a majority of the sets. But really, depending on the team, the Pokemon can go for a lot of different moves. Typically, this here is going to be your standard 3 moves. We've got Ivy Cudgel, Grassy Glide, and Spiky Shield. If you really need a redirection mon, Follow Me, of course, is very, very good. Swords Dance is also very, very popular on this Pokemon because if you go SD, Terrafire, you're at +3. All of a sudden, you're just one-shotting Resist, which is crazy. But also as well, Focus Energy is another very, very good move on this Pokemon because of the Incineroars. I'm pretty sure off memory, Focus Energy plus Ivy Cudgel, because it's a high crit chance. I forget if it's a 50% chance to crit or if it's a guaranteed crit. But basically, this is just very, very good into the Incineroars that are constantly trying to pivot around and lower your attack. You just go for the Focus Energy and just start critting all of your Ivy Cudgels, which is very, very good. And really, your EVs come down to whatever your team needs. Again, if you're playing like a Follow Me set, and you really, really need something that can live in extreme speed, this is probably your go-to, right? Just make sure you can live the E-speed, right? Get yourself up to that 76. Actually, I think 92. Off memory, I think this set here, Terrafire, Ivy Cudgel will KO all Indeedys off memory. And then again, from there, you can kind of just like pump it, do a little bit of this, again, typically speaking, if you can, I do like to hit 140 just because I like to outspeed, what's it called? Smeagol. So again, you could like, if you really wanted that 92, you could adjust like this. You still almost always live the E speeds, but it allows you to hit the speed stat. It's really up to you. There are a lot of Ogerpons out there as well that just run no speed, right? And you'll just see someone run a set like this, just get as much bulk as you can. And again, you probably want to hit that, you want to hit that 133 just so you can outspeed things like D-Knight. I've even seen people like opt for like minimum speed, sorry, not minimum speed, minus speed, go for like a Brave Nature so you can play it as like a Tail Room mon. I personally don't think it's very good, just because you can't lower the mon's IVs. So even if you were to play like a Brave Nature, you still actually have quite a bit of speed here. Like at this point, like you're speed tying or you're in the speed tiers of a lot of Ogerpon. So sorry, Gholdengo. So at that point, just like play the game. I think just try outspeed and do what you want. But again, this mon, it's all dependent on what you want, right? If you're playing something like a SD setup set, and again, like the thing with SD setup that's beautiful is like you click Grassy Glide a lot of the time, or you're like pinning with like Fake Out and Ivy Cudgel. So because of that, you don't even necessarily need that much speed. Again, if you really, really wanted, you could go up to that like 154 tier. Like I do think something like this, where you go like 154, you hit that second bump here, you pump into HP, like something like this here is completely fine. It all really just depends on what you want the Hearthflame to do. This is a very, very flexible mon that can do quite a lot of different things. But one of the best things it does is just deal damage. So next up here is Chien-Pao. Now, Chien-Pao is a pretty simple Pokemon in my opinion. If you are playing Focus Sash, this is the set here. You just want to go Adamant 252, max speed, max attack. The 4 here in defense allows you to always live base, Choice Scarf, Surging Strikes. If you do this, there is like a small chance you get carried by Surging Strike, so it's like, don't risk it, just put it into the defense. In terms of the moves here, actually, we'll touch on the Terra first. I think Terra Ghost is almost always the correct play. I do think there's an idea behind Terra Ice. I think if you're Terra Ice, you probably want to be a Jolly set. And if you're running like Jolly Terra Ice, you probably want to have Icy Wind, basically, because this just, again, Icy Wind, really good in the format, allows you to outspeed anything other than like a booster Flutter Mane or a priority Pokemon. You get off that Icy Wind and allows, its partner potentially something like a Mystic Water Urshifu or a Ogerpon Hearthflame, something like that, to have that little bit of extra speed control. In terms of the primary Ice move, Icicle Crash is just really good for damage. It's a little bit more damage, obviously, than the Ice Spinner. Ice Spinner, though, doesn't have the flinch chance, but it does have the terrain removal. So if your like Psy Spam matchup is really bad, I think Ice Spinner is pretty good. If your Rillaboom matchup is also bad, it's probably worth going Ice Spinner as well. But in saying that, a lot of the times Chien-Paos do typically like to play with the Rillaboom. So because of that, Crash is pretty good. Sucker Punch is typically the priority move of choice, but Ice Shard is also a pretty good option. Ice Shard just allows you to hit things like Landorus for super effective damage and snipe them. It also allows you to snipe things like Tornadus as well. So I do think in a closed team sheet environment, Ice Shard is very, very good in particular. And then the last move typically is Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword just gives you a way to hit Steel types, which I think this set typically does struggle with. It was also just like really good into things like Dondozo, right? Especially if they're, you know, they've got their Omni boost up. But yeah, you'll see sometimes things like Crunch, Throat Chop. You know, it depends really what you want, right? If you want that extra dark coverage, Crunch, Throat Chop are good. If you want that, you know, just the coverage in general, Sacred Sword's pretty good. And yeah, it really can kind of just fill whatever niche or whatever role you kind of need it to in that last slot. So Rillaboom is another very, very good Pokemon in this format and a pretty easy Pokemon to discuss. Typically, Woodhammer and Grassy Glide are your two primary stabs. Woodhammer, obviously just passive damage. Grassy Glide is your priority. Fake Out is one of the main reasons you use this Pokemon alongside its ability Grassy Terrain, which is just very good with things like Raging Bolt. Even, you know, some of the Life Orb Pokemon, right? You know, just being able to heal back some of that chip damage. Very, very good. Terrafire is typically the terror of choice. It's just very, very good on grass types in general. Obviously helps you resist fire. Pretty good into the Flutter Manes with Moonblast and all that kind of stuff. The last move right now on Rillaboom is typically high horsepower. Just allows you to hit things like Rillaboom and Raging Bolt and Incineroar. But also U-Turn is pretty good. In terms of the EVs, I would say the one guarantee you almost always want here is 116 Adamant. And it probably is worth mentioning as well, we are seeing people test out things like Clear Amulet. You know, Clear Amulet horsepower, it just makes your Raging Bolt matchup better and also your Incin. It just basically stops the Incins from, like, you know, cycling you with Intimidate and allows you to potentially two-shot Raging Bolt depending on its EVs. So something I also thought worth mentioning there. But typically speaking, yeah, 116 Adamant, this will normally always pick up a majority of the Flutter Manes, especially if they aren't those bold sets. You know, again, it just allows you to deal massive damage, right? Your Grassy Glides will do a lot into the what are they called? The Urshifus. It's just, in general, really, really solid. Now, in terms of like the EVs, there are like some defensive sets where you can invest a lot more into defense to allow you to live things like Ice Spinner and Icicle Crash. Off memory, I forget exactly what it is. I want to say it was like something like this. Maybe it's a bit more HP. I forget off the top of my head because I haven't actually tested for like Ice Spinner or Crash in a while. But typically speaking, if you aren't going to run max HP on Rillaboom, 192 is typically where you want to go. This is just for optimization on the Grassy Terrain number. As we mentioned earlier with Flutter Mane, you know, Grassy Terrain recovers 1/16 of your health. Unfortunately, it doesn't show it there. So basically, a multiple of 16 is what you want to be optimal. So I believe with this, you will get 12 HP per turn. If you drop it by 1, you'll get 11 per turn, right? So this here will get you 12. And then unfortunately, of course, it needs 208 to get that next bump, and it hits 207, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. You can't actually get it any higher, so you don't really play for it. In terms of the speed stat, this is another pretty big one I've seen people discuss. Again, it's all team dependent. I think having no speed investment is completely fine. Again, I think if you want to like catch some of those faster Raging Bolts, anywhere between like 214 to like 220 is okay. 220 also starts putting you in the range of some of the Gholdengos that are pretty common right now. I think they're sitting around that 218 through 19 range. If you want to really be that guy, like 124 will also get you the Jolly Incineroar calc. So Jolly Incin hits 123. So if you're really worried about like a max speed Incineroar, something like this is pretty good. But in saying that, typically speaking, I do think just something like this, buffing up that Spadef, making sure you can sit in front of Pokemon like Chi-Yu and Flutter Mane is just very, very good. So Amoonguss here is another, of course, very, very good Pokemon in the format, and a Pokemon that we have seen continuing to rise up. Now, the Terra for this Pokemon can change depending on what you need. Terra Water is typically a pretty good defensive typing on this Pokemon. Terra Fairy is another Terra we've seen quite a bit as well. It's just very good into the Raging Bolts, right? You can redirect Thunderclaps, you can redirect the Dracos and Dragon Pulses, so typically those probably are your two best ones. This here is the moveset of choice right now. Rage Powder obviously is your main redirection. Sportus allows you to put stuff to sleep, of course. And Sludge Bomb allows you to hit those pesky Ogerpons and Rillabooms that are kind of running around the meta right now. And also too, Sludge Bomb is just really, really good, right? You know, for example, Dondozas these days are, you know, potentially running things like Terra Grass, so they can't be spored. Because of that, you just fire off some Sludge Bombs. If they do Terra, fantastic, super effective damage. Even if they don't, you know, potentially you eventually get that poison. In terms of EVs, Amoonguss is pretty simple. The way Regenerator works, right, is it heals 1/3 of your HP per turn. And then also on top of that, Citrus Berry here heals for 1/4. So hitting 219 is just the optimize for Regenerator. If you go 1 less HP here, you actually just lose 1 point. So that is why you see people go for 219. Again, otherwise you would want to go for 222, which isn't there. So that's why you'll see a lot of Amoongusses here go for 219. And then again, at this stage, it's all dependent on what your team really needs. Typically, Amoonguss is a Pokemon that will play for its bump numbers on its defensive stats. Also worth mentioning as well is the speed stat here, going to 120, going to 27. This allows you to under-speed base 50s in Trick Room. These are things like Ursaluna, for example. I'll just use this guy because he's on the screen here. You'll see if I go a no-speed Ursaluna, Okay, apparently I actually have to put the 0. It hits 49 speed, so because of that, you see the Amoongusses here go for 48. So that is why you'll see people run slower Amoongusses. But in terms of bulk, it's pretty simple. If you just want a general set, the 156, 116 bold is just pretty solid. Like, this is pretty much typically what you'll see a lot of people run. It's like, it's one of those sets on Amoonguss where, like, it lives everything you need it to anyway. So, like, this is just typically generally just good bulk. If you really want it to be defensive, and again, I just realized, like, I've only got one set here for Amoonguss, so some of the other items you'll see are things like Rocky Helmet, also Mental Herb as well. If you are running a Rocky Helmet set, sometimes you'll see people go even crazier, go up to that 236 bump here and go for the Bold Nature. Again, this just allows you to make sure you can live as many physical attacks as possible. Obviously, this is one of the best answers in the game as well to Urshifu, especially with Rocky Helmet, allowing you to redirect Surging Strike, deal 50%, resist the attack, eventually switch out with Generator. It's just very, very good into it. And then, of course, the other set here as well is if you really want, like, a Spadef Amoonguss, it kind of just goes the other way, right? Where you go for, not Careful, is it Calm? Which one of these? God, I'm gonna type it in here because I forget exactly what nature it is, but Calm, yeah, it was Calm. Yeah, so again, you just see this, right, where it's a bit more Spadef, you know, obviously Amoonguss's Spadef is naturally better, so getting the, I guess, the nature typically is a bit more valuable. But yeah, again, it really depends what your team needs. That's the beauty of Amoonguss. It's just so flexible. Typically, any of these sets will be fine. It's just, you know, do you want a better candidate to Amoonguss, sorry, into Urshifu? Do you want to have a better answer into, you know, Flutter Manes and Raging Bolts? It's really all it comes down to. So, Farigiraf, in my opinion, is one of the harder Pokemon in the current format to EV for. It's got a lot of HP and pretty subpar defenses, and because of that, I do think it's a little bit tricky, and you kind of need to know what you're really EVing for. In terms of the item real quick as well, I've got Mental Herb. That's my my item of choice. And that's mainly because a lot of the Flutterbanes these days are running around with Haunt. And typically speaking, Farigiraf teams don't really play with redirection outside of like Ogerpons. And a lot of the time, you don't really want it, right? You want to lead a Farigiraf with something like an Incineroar, so you have Fake Out and Parting Shot Pressure. And because of that, you know, you can Fake Out one, you know, you can take a Taunt from like the Fluttermane, and then basically set up a Trick Room. Other options, of course, are Citrus Berry. This is like really good into like a lot of the Urshifus, right? You know, they go for the Terra Water or something like that. With Citrus Berry, you're just able to out heal it, which I do think is pretty good. We also see, of course, the Hyper Voice sets as well with the Throat Sprays. Really, it all comes down to how you want to play it. Typically speaking, this set here does hit the bump numbers I like. I forget exactly what they were calculated for. I probably should have like gone back and reverse engineered it. I'm pretty sure this defensive stat here will allow you to live things like Dragon Energy from, I forget if you actually have to go, you might have to go plus Spadef Nature, but this will allow you to live things like a Specs Moonblast. I think it actually lets you live a Terra Fairy Specs Moonblast off memory. It'll also allow you to live things like a Dragon Energy from a Regidrago, which is pretty good. With a defensive stat like this allows you to live things like, I don't think you can live a Terra Fire IV Cudgel without Intimidate, but if you have Intimidate, it's good there. It's obviously good into Rillaboom. Like, this set here will basically just hit the general stuff you need to hit, right? This, in my opinion, is just solid bulk. From there, it kind of just depends what you need to go for, right? You know, again, if you're like, say you're really, really worried about your Urshifu, then you can just go for something like this, put the rest into your defensive stat, go like a Bold Nature, or is it Bold, or maybe it's Relax. I'm thinking about the plus defense minus Speed Nature. If you want it to play in like Tail Room, hitting 85 again is never a bad thing. If you're going for a Throat Spray set, this is where things do get a bit difficult, because like, personally, I think if you're playing a Throat Spray set, this is probably the set here you want to go for. The issue with this is it just kind of throws out all your defensive calcs. At that stage, you just want to make sure you live like a Surging Strikes. I don't know the number off the top of my head because I haven't played around with offensive, but at this stage, if you're going to play offensive, just make sure you live a Surging Strikes. You've got the defensive Terra. Like, Terra very helps you out into things like Wicked Blow. Terra Fire as well as another option if you are really like scared of like Gholdengo or like Flutter Mane on lead as well. Definitely worth mentioning. In terms of the moves, if you're playing Throat Spray, Hyper Voice is like 100% mandatory. Trick Room is the other like 100% mandatory move on this Pokemon. Helping Hand is very, very good. Protect is also really solid. Like, I think if this mon has to set up Trick Room, Protect is solid, where you go like Trick Room, Helping Hand, Protect, and then one offensive attack. I do think if you're playing like Throat Spray, you probably want like Throat Spray. So you want Hyper Voice plus another attack, whether that be like Dazzling Gleam. Psychic is also really good. I also personally like Psyshock. This was one thing I did test at the start of the format, because a +1 Psyshock will deal over 50% to a Carmine Raging Bolt, which I did think was very, very important, because obviously Carmine Raging Bolt's really annoying. Terra Fairy Farigiraf is also one of the best answers into Carmine Bolt, because typically they'll be Dragon Move plus Thunderclap. They can't Thunderclap you because of Armor Tail. They can't Dragon Move you because of your Fairy Terror. And because of that, just having that way to threaten them is very, very good. But yeah, Farigiraf is just really good right now, and I think Helping Hand on the right team also just makes too much sense. So Ursaluna right now is another pretty interesting Pokemon in my opinion. We didn't just see it do like really, really good at the Mexican regional. I think it had like 5 of the top 8s, which is kind of crazy. Terra Ghost, in my opinion, is typically the go-to. It's because like when you're playing this mod in Trick Room in particular, you don't really want to waste your Trick Room turns, and because of that, you don't want to get like Fake Out cycled by an Incineroar. You just want to make sure you can fire off attacks. If you are worried about, you know, some fighting type attacks, for example, though, Terra Fairy is also just a really good neutral Terra right now. In terms of EVs, I would say the one thing that is important is this Pokemon just playing near max, right? Whether it be a Brave nature or an Adamant nature, it depends on the team. If you're playing it in Tail Room, obviously you want to go Adamant. If you're playing it in Trick Room, you want to go Brave. So a set like this where you're like, I would say if you're playing Trick Room, like this here is probably just your set, right? Where it's just like, yeah, you probably just play something like this. You could even put it in, like, if you really wanted to be like, you know, do this. Personally, again, I don't love the even number just because the way Pokemon works is it rounds down. So, like, Guts giving you a 50% boost to 111. It's like, you're just wasting a stat point there. And I know technically you're still getting one less stat. It's just, that's just the way I personally look at it. But if you are playing this thing on Tail Room, you do probably want to run it a bit speedier. Now, how quick you want to go it is entirely up to you. Because, again, it's like, do you want it to mainly function in Tailwind? You just go, like, max speed, right? Personally, again, I like to kind of get somewhere in the middle. I think 90 speed like this is okay because this allows you to hit 180. This will basically allow you to outspeed the Ogerpons, the Tornadus, stuff like that in Tail, right? I have seen people go a bit faster. You go like 188. This kind of, again, it gets you to that 188 tier, which allows you to outspeed things like Chien-Pao if they're adamant. Same with like, you know, a special attack boost of Flutter Mane, so stuff like that, which is why you will see people go up to this 94 tier. If you go for something like that, again, at that stage, you're probably just pumping it into HP. There's no real defensive calcs you're going to get out of that extra 76 EVs. So next up here is Gholdengo. Now, Gholdengo does have 2 different sets, in my opinion, that are pretty good. My personal favorite right now is this Choice Spec set. Typically with Choice Specs, obviously you're going to be pairing it up with things like Tornadus. Very, very good on those Regidrago teams. Pretty good, mainly into the Flutter Mane teams. I do think that's why we have kind of seen Gold rising up a bit again. It's just a really good answer into like a Thunderwave Flutter Mane set. Now, in saying that, I do think like Modest is the way to go. With Modest, Choice Specs, Terra Steel, this Pokemon does a ridiculous amount of damage. And typically speaking, I do think Bulky is the way to go. So with a set like this, it basically allows you to outspeed everything you need. So at like 119 here, in Tailwind, even if you get like -1 by a Flutter Mane, this will allow you to outspeed things like a Gadget Fire, allow you to outspeed things like Jolly, Hisuian Arcanine and stuff like that. So personally speaking, I think this is probably the best way to go on specs. You can also lift things like Adamant Sucker Punches from a Chien-Pao, which is very, very good. I'm pretty sure like Flare Blitz from an Incineroar also lives. So again, depending on the EVs, if they're like Adamant 36, you'll live it. If they're very offensive, you won't. If they're like Impish sets, you live it pretty comfortably. So I do think a set like this here is pretty important, but realistically, to me, this is the most important here, is this 132. If you're someone who loves speed, I think going max speed here is completely fine. Obviously, you know, you are sacrificing a bit of that bulk, but it is definitely worth it. You know, if you don't have like Icy Wind, for example, like again, I've been playing with Tornadus, so because of that, I have that secondary speed control. Again, if you're playing like, and we'll kind of get to it here with the second set, but if you're playing like Life Orb, with, you know, Icy Wind Flutter Mane, or you're playing with a, what's another great example? Raging Bolt, you know, basically it just allows you to, you know, outspeed stuff, right? Like, you know, if you go like this, you've got Tailwind, you've got Icy Wind control, it's great. The one major thing as well, I guess, to mention with the Life Orb set, with the Life Orb here as well, I'm kind of talking about Life Orb and Metal Coat at the same time. Citrus Berry even to a certain extent. But if you're specifically playing Life Orb, you do want to try to get your HP to end in a 9 if possible. Again, this is just the way, kind of similar to the grassy terrain stuff if you don't know. Life Orb will take 10% of your HP every time you use it. So, for example, if I have 169 here, this will take 16 HP. If I have one more, this will take 17 HP. The reason this is important is because now if I use 2 attacks, I just lost 34 HP. But if you take away that 1 point, now I lost 32 HP. So effectively, I actually have 1 HP more than I would have if I had 170, right? So that's kind of why you'll see it. Typically speaking, though, on Life Orb sets, you'll see something like this where they got like 130 there. And then again, depending on the player, a lot of people do like to go max speed. You know, this is not a completely uncommon set. This was like a very, very popular set, especially in the last format, something like this. My only gripe with a Gholdengo set like this is everything is either Landorus speed or like, you know, your speed tying Urshifus. Landorus is typically going to be faster than you. The Ogerpons are trying to outspeed the Landoruses. So because of that, I don't think Timid is good right now. That is why I personally am a big believer in just like the max set. Again, if you're playing Life Orb, I think something like this is completely fine, right? You go like a Modest Nature, you've still got a bit of speed. This will allow you to outspeed things like Juliensin. And yeah, I would say this is probably the best set for the like the Life Orb or the Metal Coat or whatever like that, right? In terms of Terra, Dragon is just really good because it gives you a good matchup into the Ogerpons and the Urshifu in particular. But also you're a Steel type naturally, so you're not too scared about Flutter Manes and stuff like that. So yeah, I do think this is like one of the better sets for it. So the next one here is P2. Now P2 is a Pokemon that we have seen having a bit of a resurgence once again in the format. Typically speaking, this here is the set you will see with the Terra. Terra Blast is obviously just your primary stab as a normal type. Ice Beam is just very, very good coverage. If you guys saw one of my last videos, you know I'd say that Ice is right now one of the best offensive types in the game. If you look at how many Pokemon in the top 12 it hits for super effective damage, it's kind of insane, right? You know, you've got the Genies, you've got the Grass types, you've got the Ogerpons, the Raging Bolts. Like, there are just so many Pokemon you hit super effective damage. And then in saying that, Terra Flying, Terra Blast is also in that exact same spot, right? Again, you've got the Ogerpons, the Rillabooms, you've got the Amoongusses. There are just a lot of Pokemon in the game right now that do not appreciate taking a Terra Flying, Terra Blast, especially from a Porygon that has a plus special attack from the download boost. Now, in terms of EVs, P2 is a pretty interesting one. Typically speaking, the most important thing is obviously max HP. And one thing I will say about Porygon is this Pokemon's defenses, like, naturally are just insane. With the Eviolite item giving that 1.5 times buff, your defense and special defense on this Pokemon are absolutely nutty. And because of that, it does allow you to play this a bit more offensive. Now, typically speaking, I do think hitting that 150 attack here is very, very good. The nature really comes down to the team. If you are a hard Trick Room team, I think Quiet is the way to go. Where you go like Quiet, 0 speed, and then, you know, you kind of just... At that point, I would say you probably want to put more into your defense, just because, again, Urshis, Ogerpon, stuff like that. But if you are playing it in a bit of a Tail Room team, I do think like going for like a Modest and a little bit of speed is never a bad thing. Again, I like hitting that 85 mark. This will allow you to outspeed things like Landorus and Incarnate, right? If you're in Tailwind. And again, if you're in Tailwind, obviously it is pretty nice to, you know, be able to just threaten a one-shot into it with Ice Beam. But P2, yeah, just a very, very good Trick Room setter right now. Super reliable. Obviously loves playing with like Incin and Amoonguss as well. So a very, very strong balance. So next one here is Roaring Mid. Roaring Mid has two sets in particular, I think, that are pretty good right now. The first one I'll talk about here is just the Dragon Dance set. Again, this one here is entirely up to you and how you want to play it. I think just going for something like this, where you're like adamant, you hit that 150 speed, and then you can kind of just pump the rest into defense. Like, I think a set like this here is completely fine, right? If you want to put a bit more into defense, you can, but typically speaking with Terra, it gets you out of any weaknesses like the close combats that you're typically scared of. The reason for 150 speed is this does allow you to outspeed things like Urshifu. Typically speaking as well, when you're playing like this kind of Roaring Moon set, you really want to get off one Dragon Dance before you do anything. And again, this just allows you to outspeed like, you know, things like Choice Scarf, Urshifu and stuff like that. So very, very good. If you did want to like be a little bit more... Like, if you're a bit more worried, I guess, you could get it even up to, like, 160. I think this is fine. This would allow you to outspeed a lot of common Pokemon. You know, basically everything trying to creep that, you know, those Tornadus tiers that we were showing earlier, where it's like, you've got the Landor at 153, the Ogerpon's going 154, then you have, you know, the Tornadus is going that 155, 156 to creep them, and then you got the Ogerpons trying to go up from there. Again, the speed creep was something I personally don't love, just because, like, when it comes to speed creeps, right, there's, like, it's hard to justify it because it's like, did I just waste all these EVs into speed that I'm never going to use, right? So because of that, I do think going for like 150 here is completely fine. You go Adamant Nature just to get the most out of it. You get to increase that defense here and just increase your general bulk. But I do think a set like this is pretty good. And then the other set here is the booster speed stuff. Now, this is the more defensive support set. I probably should have mentioned as well, this is Terrifying Acrobatics because you're getting the booster attack out of this. You're getting the Dragon Dance. You've got the Terrifying. It's very, very good. I do know there are sets. I've seen people like discuss this as well. There is like an offensive stat you can go for. I forget if it was like, I want to say it was like this off memory. And this way, like after an Intimidate, you still get the attack buff. So again, it really comes down to how you personally just want to play them on. Like if you want to guarantee the attack buff, then you go lower speed, more attack. But right now, I do think just something as simple as this is probably the way to go for the attack stuff. On the speed booster stuff, again, this is entirely up to you and how you want to play it into the matchups. 180 speed is typically the minimum you want to go for. The reason for this is because, you know, say you go for Tailwind, they go for Tailwind on their Tornadus, and then, you know, they Icy Wind you. With this set, he will still outspeed them on that second turn. So Tailwind, you know, this is probably just the second best Tailwind setter in the format right now. It's very good. Defensive Terra Poison is just very, very nice into a lot of, you know, the meta right now. Obviously very good into like Raging Bolt and into Flutter Mane in particular. Breaking Swipe is just fantastic. Again, one of the beautiful things about dragons is they're very good into the Fire, Water, Grass cores. You know, you think about Incin, Flare Blitz, Knockoff, you resist both. Rillaboom, you know, you resist the Wood Hammer. Urshifu, you resist the Surging Strikes. Of course, you don't resist the Close Combat, but again, that's why Terra Flying and Terra Poison are the two, you know, Terras of choice. And then, you know, you go for the Ogerpons, right? You got the Water, Grass, Fire coverage. Again, you resist them all. So because of that, its defensive profile as a dragon is very good into a lot of meta threats. And Breaking Swipe is just super good, right? You know, against board states like Rilla Ogerpon, you just Breaking Swipe them. They do absolutely no damage to you. And you just keep whittling them down, chipping them down. Removing their damage is very good. Obviously, Knockoff as well is just one of the premier, I guess, like, support moves in the format. Now, in terms of the EVs, again, this is all entirely up to you. You know, I think there's a justification for going max speed. This will just allow you to outspeed, like, all Flutter Manes that aren't timid, which I do think is very, very good. And again, that because of that, you know, you are seeing some timid speed boost of Flutter Manes hitting that 189. But again, you know, it's just a solid speed stat to hit. In terms of bulk, I do think, like, I forget exactly what it was. There was like a set. I think Carrie actually like released his set. I think it was like, I want to say it was like some set like this. I think Carrie's was actually a little bit slower maybe, but it was like just super physically defensive. And because of its physical defense, like it was able just to sit around for so long and just be super annoying. But yeah, really, it just comes down to how you want to play them on. Like, again, I think a set like this is probably fine. You probably do want to meet somewhere in the middle. Would it be like, I think it's like a set like this would honestly be completely fine. I wish I had Carrie's set available right now, because I'm pretty sure he was like 140 defense and like max HP. Like, I want to see, I think Carrie was something like this. Does that make sense? 168? I mean, that's not, maybe it was just that set they're hitting 168. Because again, this will get like the base 100s. I'm pretty sure Lando is 167 if it goes timid. So yeah, this would even get like timid Lando. So this would also make sense, but yeah, like bulky Moon, you just want to like stick around basically. Breaking Swipe, Tailwind, Knockoff, just be a pest, be speed control, all that good stuff. Regidrago, this is a pretty simple Pokemon. I think in terms of items, you got two options, well, technically three. It's Draco Plate / Dragon Fang or Life Orb, depending on the set. The moves are pretty set as well. Dragon Energy, Draco Meteor are just your two primary stabs. Obviously, with Dragon Maw, you just do ridiculous damage. And then Earth Power just allows you to hit the Steel type, so very good. And of course, you want Protect. In terms of Terras, there are a few options. I think Steel is overall the best one. I've seen people go for Poison. I personally don't think it's good. Poison's more of like a Urshifu thing where, you know, you lead into an Urshi and they got a Surging, they're going to close combat. If they're Surging into a Dragon type, it's bad. If they close combat into a Terra Poison, it's great, you know. So, sorry, it's technically bad for them. Again, items, you know, we spoke about it, Draco Plate and Life Orb, or Dragon Fang. The other Terras as well, things like Terra Fairy's really good, especially for like things like the Dark Urshis that we've seen rising up. It's also pretty good as well if you go for something like Terra Ghost, just so you can't be faked out. In terms of EVs, entirely up to you. Modest is just so you can get as much damage as possible. We have seen some people go for Timid. Not sure how I feel about Timid. Losing the damage, I do think, is pretty crucial on a Pokemon that kind of wants to one-shot everything. But yeah, end of the day, it's personal preference. Timid is cool for, you know, certain matchups, but Modest will just give you as much damage as possible. So Urshi Dark is a mon we have seen rising up quite a bit recently. In particular, you know, on the Focus Sash set here, this is essentially what you're going to see, right? It's the triple stab where you got Wicked Blow, Sucker Punch, Close Combat, Terra Dark just to buff up the damage on those dark moves, and then just Adamant max defenses, put it wherever, right? I don't think there's any calc that is affected by where you put this defensive stat. So because of that, typically I just put into Spadef because it is the lowest stat. HP sometimes as well, just because I like the even numbers. But the more, you know, intuitive one here is the Choice Banded set. Now, again, this really comes down to the team you're playing. I played the Smeagol team with the Jolly Banded Shifu for a little bit. It felt pretty good. Also, as well, worth mentioning for the Banded set, Terra Poison Jab is typically the way to go. Terra Poison just gives you a resist into fairies, which you're typically 4x resisted to, so it allows you to live that. And also, Terra Poison Jab is just very good into like things like the Urshifus, right? So if you're going like the Jolly set, I think this is probably the way to go. But really, it comes down to your team. I do think that you want to be as close to Adamant Max as possible. We did see Kieran Singh's set where it was like, I forget exactly how fast he was. I want to say he hit like 128, and then kind of put the rest into bulk, right? And off memory, it was like a set like this, very, very similar to what you run on the Rapid Strike. The reason for this is just to make sure you never get KO'd by things like the banded Extreme Speeds. It allows you to, you know, live like 2 Thunderclaps and stuff like that. And the speed set here hitting 128 basically allows you to outspeed, like if you have Icy Wind support, whether it be like a Flutter Mane or a Tornadus, you essentially outspeed everything in the game if they don't have like Tailwind or Icy Wind on their side. But it also makes you slow enough where you can kind of play in Trick Room. Also worth mentioning as well, the bulk also helps out with things like Tachyon Cutter from a special attack boosting Iron Crown as well, which is worth mentioning. So surprisingly enough, after Regulation H, Dragonite did kind of start seeing some more play with different sets, but this is the stock standard set that we have seen for a very, very long time. This is just the Choice Banded Terra Normal D-Knight. Typically, you just pair this thing with Chien-Pao and you try to one-shot everything with Terra Normal Extreme Speed. The set here, I don't think it changes too much. You will see Aerial swapped out occasionally for a different move. Especially in like Best of One, you can throw like a Haze on this just to get like Dondozos. But typically Extreme Speed and Outrage are your two main moves, right? If you need Extreme Speed is just really good at like trying to one-shot things from full HP. Outrage is also really, really nice when you go up against some Trick Room teams, right? You know, you just lead with Inner Focus Dragonite, you can't be faked out, you click Choice Banded Outrage next with Chien-Pao. If you hit the Trick Room setter, typically they're going to go down, and it's pretty fun. But the other set we are seeing rise up once again is the Loaded Dice set. Now, obviously, this was a set we saw be quite popular back in Reg H, but people realized how good it was, really, and have started trying to adapt it. Now, Terra Steel has become the Terra of choice. Again, Flutter Mane's everywhere, Icy Winds everywhere. It's just really, really good. And then on top of that as well, Multi-Scale has once again come back, just allowing you to live certain double-ups. Now, again, in terms of the bulk, this is entirely up to you. I'm still a big fan of just going max because you have multi-scale. Like, multi-scale is there to essentially enable you to survive that extra attack. But again, we've seen some people, you know, just go for that like 125 speed stat, allows you to, you know, invest a little bit into bulk. Really, I don't think there's like any defensive calcs that you're trying to hit personally. And that's why I'm just like happy with a set like this. But yeah, look, the main thing with Loaded Dice right now is the Loaded Dice sets in particular pair really well with the Gouging Fire stuff, right? So you put it next to a Gouging Fire, who's a speed booster. You'll how you up. You now have a +1 Dragonite. Then you Scale Shot. As long as you hit and it's not resisted, you're probably going to one-shot with a +1 Dragonite. And then eventually, you know, you get to an end game where Scale Shot's incredibly good. Obviously, you have Extreme Speed. Stomping Tantrum's really good for the resists, because typically this Pokemon does have issues with Steel types. Steel obviously resists Dragon and Normal. So having Stomping Tantrum is really, really nice there. And then the final mon on our list for today is Hisuian Arcanine. Now, again, this is a mon that has picked up quite a bit in Regulation F 2.0, mainly because, one, rocks in general are just really good. Like, unfortunately for rock, it's like, offensively, it's such a good type. There's not that many good rock types, sadly. And then on top of that as well, it's just like, you know, the moves suck, right? Let's be honest. Like, Rock Slide, when it hits is great, but 70 base power, 75 base power for 90 accuracy sucks, but like 30% flinch chance is great. But yeah, look, this mon in particular, it just pairs really well with Flutter Mane. That's kind of the main thing, right? You're intimidating for Flutter Mane, making that bold set just incredibly tough to deal with. You're clicking Thunder Wave into Rock Slide, which means essentially, I think the math off the top of my head was like 53%, because it's like a 30% chance to be paralyzed and then a 30% chance to be flinched, which ends up being like a 52% chance to either power or flinch, which is obviously broken. Coming off a Choice Banded Hisuian Arcanine as well is very, very strong. Flare Blitz is just really good in the current format. Head Smash is just really good in the current format again. Obviously, the accuracy sucks, but if this hits, it absolutely slaps. And Extreme Speed can just close out games. Terra Grass is very, very good again for the redirection. It stops you from being spored. It gives you a resistance, because again, this mod's 4x weak to both ground and water, so giving you a resistance to both is very, very important. And then look, just in terms of the EVs here, people have started adapting. Jolly was the play for a little bit, and again, this is why we saw some people going for that like 157, 158 speeds here, just to make sure they outsped things like a Jolly Hisuian Arcanine. But we have seen recently people kind of slow it down just a little bit and add some bulk. Again, it's always up to you. Like, if I'm going to run speedy, like 140 typically is that speed stat I want to hit. If you're really worried about the Urshis, you know, you may as well just go 142. In saying that, I'm sure some Urshis will adapt and start going 143 themselves. Because you are an adamant nature, you also don't have to invest everything into attack. I do think like a set like this can be completely fine. But really, again, it just comes down to what you want, right? Typically, I would play it. If you feel like you're getting one shot, you can kind of adjust it. Because you are choice banded, you can afford to always drop a little bit more attack. So go down to like 116 adamant, you know, you can invest it more into HP. I'm pretty sure I actually have even seen people, because they pair it with the Flutter Mane, they go like the set like this, where it's like, again, you hit that low bump, you hit that 128. So now with Icy Wind support, you add speed things like Jolly Chien-Pao, you know, Icy Wind, Rock Slide, all that kind of stuff. And then of course, you know, you're just incredibly bulky with max HP. So yeah, that's basically gonna be it for this one, guys. I guess let me know what you thought of all of these sets. Let me know if there's any other Pokemon you basically wanted me to cover as well. Like, I realized once I finished this that there, you know, as much as people like to say this format is very, very centralizing, there are still a lot of Pokemon, like, I didn't have on this list. Like, I'm not going to show it to you guys here, but I'll pull it up on my other screen. You know, Ting-Lu's not on this list. Fire wasn't on this list. That's just 2 Pokemon that are pretty good right now. My goat Chi-Yu I didn't have on this list. What else do we have here? Lando T's another one we've seen rising up. Indeedee, Crown are both 2 really good ones as well. Sinister, Galarian Zapdos, Cresselia. So, yeah, there's actually quite a few Pokemon in this metagame right now that are pretty good. But yeah, that's just 20 of the Pokemon I wanted to speak about today. Let me know what you thought of the video down below. And I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Peace.